My name is Carol Thompson, I'm 65 years old, and my own son-in-law called me an ugly rat at my daughter's wedding in front of hundreds of people. Before I tell you about how I took everything from him, his company, his home, his entire life, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The ballroom at the Drake Hotel in Chicago felt like a different planet. Chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, and the air buzzed with the low hum of old money. I sat at a table in the back, a small gray island in a sea of silk dresses and tailored tuxedos. My dress was the nicest one I owned, a simple navy blue piece I'd bought on sale at Kohl's, but next to the jewels and designer labels, I felt like I was wearing a paper bag. My daughter, Jessica, was a vision. She floated across the room in a gown that probably cost more than my car, her hand resting delicately on the arm of her new husband, Mark Vanderbilt. He was exactly the kind of man you'd expect to marry into wealth, handsome in a bland, predictable way, with a smug confidence that radiated from him like heat. I had raised Jessica on my own after her father passed away, working 2 jobs to make sure she never went without. I'd scraped together enough for a small college fund so she could get a degree and a better life. I thought I had raised her to value kindness and character above all else. I was wrong. The moment she met Mark, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, my small home in Ohio was embarrassing. My life was provincial, and I was just a reminder of a past she was desperate to escape. When it was Mark's turn to give his toast, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I'd seen the little flashes of his arrogance before, the way he'd cut me off mid-sentence, the dismissive wave of his hand when I tried to offer advice. He tapped his champagne glass with a spoon, and the room fell silent. He had that polished, predatory smile on his face as his eyes swept the crowd, finally landing on me. "And now, everyone," he boomed, his voice dripping with condescension, "let's meet the ugly rat we have to live with." The silence lasted for a split second before it was shattered by a wave of laughter. It wasn't just a few chuckles, it was a roaring, unrestrained sound. Mark's parents, a stiff-looking couple with faces like pruned walnuts, threw their heads back and howled. The guests at their table followed suit, turning to stare at me, their faces red with amusement. It felt like a punch to the gut. The air was punched out of my lungs. A hot, prickly shame washed over me, crawling up my neck. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, my face a frozen mask. But the worst part, the part that truly broke something inside me, was Jessica. My daughter. My only child. She didn't protest. She didn't even look uncomfortable. She smiled. Not a pained smile, not a forced one. A genuine, bright, pleased smile. As if her husband had just told the cleverest joke in the world. She chose them. In that moment, in front of everyone, she chose their laughter over her mother's dignity. My blood ran cold. The clinking of glasses and the happy chatter of the wedding faded into a dull roar in my ears. They all saw me as a joke, a piece of trash that had washed up on their pristine shore. A poor widow whose only purpose was to be the butt of a cruel joke to elevate their own fragile egos. But as the laughter started to die down, I noticed something. One person wasn't laughing. Across the room, standing near the head table, was Mark's uncle, Robert Vanderbilt. He stood frozen, his champagne flute trembling in his hand. The color had drained from his face, and his eyes were wide with a kind of primal terror. He wasn't looking at a poor mother-in-law from Ohio. He was looking at a ghost. He was the only one in that room who had ever dealt with the anonymous head of CT Holdings, the investment firm that had bought up his family's debt, and now owned a controlling interest in everything they had. He was the only one who knew the secret I had guarded for years. They had all laughed, but he looked like he was staring into an open grave. And in that moment he knew. It was his. Robert Vanderbilt looked like he'd just witnessed a car crash in slow motion. While his nephew Mark soaked in the applause for his cruel joke, Robert's face was a canvas of dawning horror. It wasn't just shock. It was the specific cold terror of a man who suddenly understands the full scope of a disaster he is powerless to stop. His knuckles were bone-white where he gripped the delicate stem of his champagne flute, and I was half surprised it didn't shatter in his hand. A small muscle pulsed in his jaw, a frantic rhythmic beat against his ashen skin. I knew that look. I'd seen it before on the faces of men in boardrooms right before I dismantled their careers. It was the look of someone staring into the abyss and seeing it stare right back. You see, Robert was the only one in that glittering room who had a reason to fear me. He was the family's chief financial officer, the one who actually understood the numbers. While his brother and nephew were busy playing the part of corporate titans, Robert was the one in the trenches, the one who had to juggle the debt and appease the creditors. He was the one who had sat in those hushed, desperate meetings with my team of lawyers a few months ago. His face grim as he signed away chunks of the company to save it from total collapse. He had negotiated the terms of their salvation with a faceless entity known only as CT Holdings. He'd never met me. He'd never spoken to me. To him and to the world, the head of CT Holdings was a phantom, an unknown and untouchable power broker. In his mind, he was probably dealing with some ruthless Wall Street shark, a man who ate companies like his for breakfast. The last thing he ever expected was for that phantom to be a 65-year-old woman in a navy blue dress from Kohl's, the very woman his nephew had just publicly branded a rat. The gears were turning furiously behind his eyes. I could almost see the frantic calculations. The timing of my investment, the quiet efficiency of the takeover, the complete control I now exerted over every aspect of their financial lives. It all clicked into place for him in that one horrifying moment. His eyes darted from my face to Mark's, then to his brother, a silent, desperate plea for them to shut up, to stop laughing, to understand the catastrophic mistake they were making. But it was like trying to signal a tidal wave to turn back. They were lost in their own smug superiority, completely oblivious. They were celebrating a wedding, but Robert was attending a wake, the wake of the Vanderbilt legacy, and he was the only one who had read the obituary. The smug smile on my son-in-law's face was still plastered there, but the raw terror in Robert's eyes was the single most satisfying thing I had witnessed all evening. It was a promise of the fear to come. I let my gaze lock with his across the crowded room. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I simply held his stare, letting him see the cold, hard certainty in my eyes. I gave him the smallest of nods, a gesture so subtle no one else would have noticed. It was a confirmation of his worst fears. A wave of something, was it nausea? Resignation? Washed over his face. He broke eye contact immediately, staring down into his glass as if it held the answers to the universe. He had seen the truth and it had terrified him. The power in that room had tilted on its axis, and only the two of us felt the ground shift. The laughter eventually subsided, replaced by the self-satisfied chatter of the elite. The wedding machine churned on. Toasts were made to the happy couple. The 5-tiered cake was cut with a silver knife. Jessica and Mark shared their first dance, swaying under the chandeliers, lost in their perfect gilded fantasy. I ate my chicken, which tasted like cardboard, and watched them. I watched my daughter, my beautiful, foolish daughter, who had traded her soul for a life built on a lie. A life that I now owned. I thought her smiling betrayal was the deepest cut she could inflict. I was so naive. The truly unforgivable betrayal wouldn't happen in a grand ballroom. It would come a week later, over the phone, and it would prove that my daughter wasn't just content to watch me be humiliated. She was ready to pick my bones clean herself. The call came a week later. I was sitting at my kitchen table paying bills when my phone buzzed. Jessica's picture filled the screen. A smiling, professionally taken photo from her engagement shoot. For a foolish, hopeful second, my heart lifted. Maybe this was it. The apology. The moment of clarity. Mom. The voice on the other end was bright, bubbly, and utterly fake. It was the voice she used with salespeople she wanted to charm or waiters she wanted better service from. My heart sank back into my stomach. Hello, Jessica. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Did you have a nice time in Hawaii? My voice was flat, betraying none of the acid churning inside me. Oh, it was just divine. Absolutely perfect. Mark is already looking at properties in Maui. Can you believe it? She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. There was a pause, the kind of calculated silence that precedes a request. So listen about your wedding gift. My wedding gift. The beautiful Irish chain quilt I had poured 6 months of my life into. I remembered sitting by the fire on cold Ohio nights, my fingers sore, stitching tiny, perfect squares of fabric together. There were pieces from her baby blanket, a swatch from her father's favorite flannel shirt, a bit of lace from her prom dress. It wasn't just a blanket. It was a tapestry of our lives together. It was so thoughtful, she said, and the condescension in that single word was a slap in the face. It was her polite, upper-class way of calling it quaint, homespun, and worthless. We love it. It's just, well, something's come up. Here it comes, I thought. Mark and I, we found our dream house. It's in Winnetka, right on the water. It's an absolute palace, Mom. But the closing is coming up faster than we thought. And with all the wedding expenses, we're just in a little bit of a cash flow crunch. Her voice dropped into a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were letting me in on a secret. We were just wondering if you might be able to help us out. Just a small loan. To get us over the hump. I waited. How small, Jessica? $50,000, she said, the number tripping off her tongue with a casualness that took my breath away. We'll pay you back as soon as Mark's year-end bonus comes in, I swear. $50,000. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it. After publicly sanctioning my humiliation, after laughing in my face, after treating me like dirt on their shoe, they now wanted me to finance their palace. They didn't see me as a mother. They saw me as a backstop. A forgotten, dusty bank account they could raid when their primary sources were unavailable. It was the final, ultimate insult. They not only disrespected me, they still felt entitled to what was mine. My first instinct, my human instinct, was to scream. To unleash a torrent of rage and pain that had been building for years. But David's voice echoed in my head, calm and steady. Never let them see your anger, Carol. Emotion is a liability. Logic is a weapon. A new plan, cold and sharp and perfect, crystallized in my mind. I see, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. That's a considerable sum. Oh, we know, Mom, but it would mean the world to us. It would literally save us, she pleaded, laying the drama on thick. All right, Jessica, I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, but I forced them out. I can do that for you. But this is a business transaction. I'll have my lawyer draft a simple promissory note. I'll need both your and Mark's signatures notarized. Once I receive the document, I'll wire the funds. The relief that flooded her voice was nauseating. Oh, Mom, thank you. You're a lifesaver. I knew you'd understand. She didn't understand a thing. The signed and notarized IOU arrived by FedEx the next morning. I walked to my local bank, the same one where I'd had to beg for a loan extension after David died, and authorized the wire transfer. $50,000 gone with the click of a button. As I knew would happen, there was no follow-up call. No text message of thanks. Just silence. They had gotten what they wanted. They thought they had just secured their down payment. What they had actually done was sign a confession. They had given me a legally binding document proving their greed and their callousness, and I would file it away with the other pieces of evidence I was collecting. It was another steel bar in the cage I was building for them. I need to press pause for a moment because to understand what happened next, you need to understand the secret I kept from everyone, including my own daughter. The image I projected to the world, Carol Thompson, quiet widow from Ohio, living a simple life on a fixed income, was a carefully crafted illusion. It was the perfect camouflage. My husband, David, was the quietest man I ever knew. But his mind was a roaring engine. He wasn't a gambler or a flashy stock picker. He was a student of value, a master of the long game. He saw the world in spreadsheets and balance sheets. After Jessica would go to bed, our kitchen table would transform into a classroom. He'd spread out the financial pages of the newspaper and teach me. He taught me how to read a quarterly report, not for what it said, a company's promotion of itself, but for what it didn't say. He taught me that debt was a tool, that patience was the ultimate virtue, and that real power was never loud. Carol, he'd say, tracing a stock chart with his finger, never fall in love with a company, and never let anyone know the full extent of what you have. The minute they do, you become a target. When his heart gave out during Jessica's first year of college, I was devastated. The grief was a physical weight. But after the initial shock of his funeral and the loneliness settled in, I realized he had left me more than just a modest inheritance and a paid-off house. He had left me an education. He had given me a suit of armor. So I put it on. I took the life insurance money, a sum that seemed enormous to me then, and I didn't put it in a safe CD or a mutual fund. I followed David's rules. I started small. I bought a struggling laundromat in a working-class neighborhood that everyone else had written off. I improved it, made it clean and safe, and it started turning a profit. Then I bought the small strip mall it was in. Then I bought a few apartment buildings in Cleveland that were undervalued and poorly managed. I created CT Holdings, a name intentionally designed to be forgettable. Brick by silent brick, I built an empire. A logistics company here, a portfolio of commercial real estate there. I never put my name on anything. I was insulated by layers of attorneys and LLCs. To my neighbors, I was the nice lady who brought them cookies. To my daughter, I was the frugal mom who still clipped coupons. To the business world, I was a ghost. I had been watching Vanderbilt Industries for over a year before Jessica even brought Mark home. It was a textbook case of a legacy company being run into the ground by an arrogant heir. Mark was using it as his personal piggy bank, funding a lifestyle his own salary couldn't possibly support. He made reckless acquisitions, ignored shifting market trends, and surrounded himself with yes-men. The company was rotting from the inside out, but the family was too proud to admit it. When their debt-to-equity ratio reached a critical point and the bank started getting nervous, I made my move. I didn't try to buy their stock. That would have been too public. Instead, through CT Holdings, I started buying their debt from the lenders for pennies on the dollar. The banks were happy to offload the risk. When Vanderbilt Industries inevitably defaulted on their loan covenants, they were in a panic. That's when I extended a lifeline. Through my lawyers, I offered a generous deal. I would forgive the debt in exchange for a controlling interest in the company. They saw it as their only way out. They thought they were being rescued by a savvy, anonymous investment firm. They had no idea they were handing the keys to their kingdom to the woman their golden boy was about to publicly humiliate. Jessica thought her entire future rested on marrying a Vanderbilt. She never dreamed that her mother already owned them. That ignorance was the most painful betrayal of all, and it was the very thing that would become her undoing. My campaign against Mark Vanderbilt didn't begin with a declaration of war. It began with paper cuts. 1,000 tiny, frustrating, inexplicable cuts designed to make him bleed out slowly. The first target was his ego. He had been working for months on a massive partnership with a tech firm in California, a deal he crowed about to anyone who would listen. He saw it as his masterpiece, the move that would prove his genius to his father and the world. The final contracts were ready to be signed. He had a lavish dinner planned to celebrate. 24 hours before the signing, my legal team, acting as representatives for the majority shareholder, flagged a dozen obscure clauses in the agreement. They requested a comprehensive review for potential long-term liabilities. The deal wasn't dead. It was just stuck, mired in a bureaucratic swamp of my own creation. Jessica called me, her voice tight with anxiety. "I don't understand, Mom. Mark is going crazy. He says his own lawyers are sabotaging him. He spent the whole night on the phone shouting. I've never seen him like this." "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, dear," I said, my voice a calm balm on her frayed nerves. "These things happen in business." Next, I went after his cash. Vanderbilt Industries operated on a revolving line of credit, a financial lifeline they used for everything from payroll to purchasing inventory. It was due for its annual renewal. I had my representatives on the board demand a full-scale audit of the company's financials before approving the extension. It was an unprecedented request, but as the majority shareholder, my vote was the only one that mattered. The credit line was frozen, pending review. The chaos that ensued was immediate. The first sign of trouble was payroll. The direct deposits were a day late. It caused a quiet panic throughout the company. Then the vendors started calling. The office coffee service was suspended. The company's shipping account with FedEx was put on hold due to non-payment. These were small indignities, but they were public. They were cracks in the Vanderbilt facade for all the world to see. Mark's arrogance couldn't comprehend it. In his mind, he was a master of the universe. These were problems for lesser men. He stormed through the office, a tornado of rage and blame. He fired his long-suffering assistant for failing to manage the accounts. He accused his head of sales of not bringing in enough revenue. The concept that this could be a coordinated attack and intelligent assault was completely alien to him. He was like a chess player who had only ever played checkers, suddenly finding himself in checkmate without ever understanding the rules of the game. "It's just a string of bad luck," Jessica insisted to me over the phone, trying to convince herself as much as me. The economy is tough. Everyone is struggling. You're right, dear, I cooed. I'm sure things will turn around. But they wouldn't. I was the one turning the screws. Every move was deliberate, designed to isolate him and dismantle his confidence piece by piece. I didn't want to destroy the company. I wanted to reclaim it. But first I had to break the man who thought he was its king. He thought the pressure at the office was the worst of it, that he could find refuge in his new opulent life. He had no idea that my next move wasn't aimed at his company. It was aimed at his castle. In a desperate attempt to project an image of stability, Mark and Jessica decided to throw a lavish housewarming party. The invitation was thick cardstock, embossed in gold, a testament to their unwavering belief that if you look successful, you are successful. This party wasn't about celebrating a new home. It was a PR campaign. It was an act of defiance aimed at the whispers and rumors that were starting to circulate through the city's elite circles. I drove up from Ohio for the occasion, my sensible sedan feeling distinctly out of place among the flotilla of Teslas and Range Rovers lining the curved driveway. The house was a monument to new money, a sprawling limestone mansion that looked more like a bank than a home. Music and laughter spilled from the open doors. Jessica greeted me with a brittle smile and a kiss that didn't quite land on my cheek. She was wearing a red dress that shimmered under the light of a crystal chandelier so large it seemed to defy gravity. "Mom, you came. Come on, let me show you around. You are going to die." She led me through rooms filled with people I didn't know, all of them laughing a little too loudly and holding their wine glasses just so. Her tour was a breathless narration of expense. The floors are reclaimed French oak. This painting is by a very important artist from New York. We had the entire kitchen custom built in Italy. She wasn't sharing her joy with me. She was presenting evidence. Evidence of her success, her arrival, her superiority. She desperately needed me to be dazzled by the life she had chosen over me. I just smiled politely, my hands clasped in front of me. "It's a very big house, Jessica. A very big house. My very big house." The irony was a sweet, secret warmth inside me. While they were busy picking out marble countertops and Italian appliances, I had been busy making a few phone calls. The $50,000 loan they took from me was a drop in the bucket for their down payment. The bulk of it was financed through a high-interest mortgage from a boutique lender. Through another, entirely separate subsidiary of CT Holdings, one that specialized in distressed real estate assets, I bought that mortgage. The transaction was buried under so many layers of corporate jargon that it was completely untraceable back to me. Every month, when they made their staggering mortgage payment, the money was wired into an account that I controlled. They were living in my house. They were paying me rent. I followed Jessica out to the vast stone terrace. Below us, a perfectly manicured lawn sloped down to the dark, choppy waters of Lake Michigan. Mark was there, the lord of his manor, holding a glass of whiskey and pontificating to a circle of admirers. He was telling some story about a business deal, his voice full of bravado. He saw me standing there with Jessica and gave me a curt nod, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes before he turned back to his audience. I was an unwelcome guest in my own home, a ghost at their victory party. They stood there so proud, so secure on their patch of prime real estate, believing these walls of stone and glass made them invincible. They had no idea they were standing on a trapdoor, and my hand was on the lever. I could have pulled it right then. I could have walked over, interrupted his little story, and informed him that he and his friends were trespassing. The thought was tempting. The image of his arrogant face collapsing in on itself was delicious. But it would have been a private victory. I wanted a public execution. Their humiliation needed to be as grand and as public as their pride. And I knew the perfect stage was already being set. Mark's ego, though battered, was not broken. In his world, the solution to any problem was a bigger, flashier display of power. To combat the whispers of his company's financial trouble, he orchestrated his masterpiece of public relations. He would serve as the chairman for the Chicago Children's Hospital Annual Miracle Gala. It was the most prestigious charity event in the Midwest. A night where old and new money collided in a symphony of philanthropy and self-congratulation. It was the perfect vehicle for him to publicly reassert his family's wealth and influence. The night of the gala was a parody of opulence. The Art Institute of Chicago had been transformed. Tables were draped in silk, and towering floral arrangements scented the air. I found my assigned seat at a table in the far back corner, a place reserved for minor sponsors and unimportant relatives. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the spectacle. I watched Mark and Jessica glide through the room, masters of their universe. He in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, she in a glittering silver gown that made her look like a porcelain doll. They were a king and queen holding court, accepting the fealty of their subjects. The evening progressed with silent auctions for ludicrous items. A week on a yacht, a walk-on role in a movie, a puppy with a diamond collar. The bidding was fierce, driven by ego as much as generosity. Finally, after the dessert plates were cleared, the lights dimmed. It was time for the main event, the chairman's speech and pledge. Mark took the stage to a wave of enthusiastic applause. He was a natural performer, his voice smooth and confident as he spoke of hope, community, and the moral obligation of the successful to give back. He was charming, he was convincing, and he was a complete fraud. He built to his grand crescendo. "And so," he said, his voice ringing with emotion, "in the spirit of this incredible evening, and on behalf of my family and our company, Vanderbilt Industries is honored and humbled to pledge a cornerstone donation of $1 million. The room exploded. It was a genuine showstopper. People leaped to their feet, and the applause was deafening. $1 million. It was a number designed to inspire awe, to erase any doubts about their financial standing. Mark bathed in the ovation, his smile wide and triumphant. A woman from the hospital board hurried onto the stage with one of those giant novelty checks, ready for the photographers who were swarming the front of the stage. Backstage, an accountant was poised to process the wire transfer. And then, nothing happened. The applause began to taper off, replaced by a low, confused murmur. The woman on stage held her smile, but it was frozen in place. Her eyes kept flicking nervously to the wings. Mark's triumphant expression began to curdle into confusion. His assistant, a young man with a permanently panicked look, scurried onto the stage and whispered urgently in his ear. I could see Mark's face under the hot stage lights. The confident tan seemed to drain away, replaced by a sickly gray pallor. He whispered back, his jaw tight. The assistant looked even more panicked and rushed off stage. The murmur in the audience grew louder, the whispers turning from curious to critical. What's going on? Did you hear? The transfer isn't going through. I heard they were having trouble. I guess the rumors are true. I knew exactly what was happening. Mark was trying to write a check from an account that was, for all intents and purposes, empty. The last of the company's liquid assets had been used to cover the payroll from 2 days earlier. The credit lines were frozen. His personal accounts were leveraged to the hilt. He was a king with an empty treasury, and he had just tried to buy the adoration of his subjects with counterfeit coins. He tried to salvage the moment, stepping back to the microphone with a shaky laugh. Just a little technical snag with the bank. They can't handle this much generosity all at once. But the spell was broken. No one laughed. They just stared. The moment of his greatest triumph had become the scene of his most profound humiliation. He had been exposed in the most public way imaginable as a fraud. The great Vanderbilt name was now associated not with philanthropy, but with a bounced check. He and Jessica practically ran from the stage, their faces burning with shame. The gala, his grand statement, had ended in a fiasco. As I calmly gathered my purse and walked out into the cool night air, I knew the fallout was just beginning. The public cracks had appeared. Now the private collapse would follow. The knock on my door came 2 days later. The rain was sheeting down, a miserable Ohio sky weeping over a world that felt gray and cold. I knew it was her. A mother always knows. Jessica stood on my covered porch looking like a drowned bird. Her $1,000 coat was soaked through, her perfect hair plastered to her scalp, and mascara had run in dark tracks down her pale cheeks. The proud, defiant woman from the wedding was gone. In her place was a broken child who had finally realized the world was not her fairy tale. I opened the door and just stood there, letting the silence be my response. I didn't offer her a towel or a warm drink. I let her stand in her own misery. "Mom!" she choked out, the word catching in her throat. I stepped aside and she stumbled into my small, warm living room. It was the same living room she had grown up in, the one she had come to despise for its simplicity, for its lack of grandeur. Now, it seemed to be the only safe harbor she had left. She didn't sit down. She paced back and forth on my worn oriental rug, her hands twisting together, the words pouring out of her in a torrent of despair. "It's over, Mom. Everything. It's all gone. The story about the gala is everywhere. Our friends won't answer our calls. The bank called about the house. They're talking about foreclosure." Her voice cracked. "Mark's parents are blaming him. They're threatening to cut him off completely. They said he brought shame on the family." She stopped pacing and whirled to face me, her eyes wild with a mixture of grief and anger. "And Mark? He's like a ghost. He just sits in his study all day drinking. He won't talk to me. Or if he does, he's screaming. He screams that this is all my fault. That if I had a better relationship with you, none of this would be happening." Finally, the real reason for her visit emerged. "You did this," she accused, her voice rising. "I know you did. Robert told us everything. This is all you. You have to stop it. You've made your point. You've ruined us. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" I let her accusations hang in the air, echoing in the quiet room. I walked calmly to my favorite armchair, the one my husband used to sit in, and sat down. I looked at her, this child I had raised, now a stranger consumed by a world of her own choosing. "Happy?" I said, my voice dangerously soft. "No, Jessica, I'm not happy. What I feel is a profound sense of sorrow. Sorrow that I raised a daughter who values money over integrity, and appearances over love. But this is revenge," she sobbed. "It's cruel." "Do not mistake consequences for cruelty," I said, my voice hardening. "You are not the victim here. You are a co-conspirator. You stood by and smiled when your husband called me a rat. You came to me, not with an apology, but with a request for $50,000 to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford. You made your choices, Jessica. You chose that family, that life, that man. And now you are simply reaping what you have sown." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. "Mark Vanderbilt is a failed CEO who mismanaged a company. He is being held accountable. You are a grown woman who signed a legal document for a loan. You will be held accountable. These are not emotional acts of revenge. They are the cold, hard facts of the world you were so desperate to join. You just never thought the rules would apply to you." She collapsed onto the sofa, her face in her hands, her body shaking with gut-wrenching sobs. It was the sound of a life unraveling. "So what do I do?" she whispered through her tears. "That," I said, standing up, "is the first real question you've asked in years. You have a choice. You can stay on that sinking ship, clinging to the wreckage of your sham marriage and their tarnished name. Or you can decide to save yourself. You can leave it all behind and start the long, hard work of rebuilding a life, a real life, on a foundation of honesty and humility." I left her there, sobbing in my living room. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer a hug. The lesson had to be absolute. She had to choose on her own, whether she wanted to drown with them or learn to swim back to shore. The Vanderbilt family's final pathetic implosion happened, as it was always bound to, behind the closed doors of their ostentatious mansion. Robert called me that night to give me a play-by-play, his voice weary, as if he'd just witnessed a multi-car pileup. Mark's parents, in a last-ditch effort to maintain some semblance of control, had summoned Mark and Jessica for a family council. It was, in reality, a kangaroo court designed to assign blame. The atmosphere, Robert said, was toxic. Mark's father, a man who hadn't made a meaningful business decision in 20 years, sat at the head of the long dining table like a deposed king. He lectured Mark on the importance of the Vanderbilt name, a name Mark had dragged through the mud. Mark's mother sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, bemoaning the loss of her social invitations as if it were a death in the family. Mark, who had apparently been drinking since noon, was in no mood to be lectured. He was a cornered animal, lashing out at everything and everyone. He blamed the global economy. He blamed his sales team. He blamed the media for blowing the gala out of proportion. His excuses grew more and more desperate until his wild, bloodshot eyes finally settled on the quietest person at the table. "And you," he slurred, jabbing an unsteady finger across the table at his uncle. "What about you, Uncle Robert? Mr. Numbers, the financial wizard. How did you let this happen?" You were supposed to be watching the books. You were supposed to protect us. This is your fault as much as anyone's. You're either a complete idiot, or you're in on it. Robert told me something inside him just snapped. He had spent months trying to warn them, trying to make them see the cliff they were racing toward, only to be met with dismissive arrogance. This accusation was the final insult. He pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the marble floor, and stood up. His face, usually so calm and composed, was flushed with a deep, righteous anger. Idiot. Robert's voice was low and trembling with rage. You want to talk about idiots, you pampered, arrogant child? Robert, that's enough, his brother commanded. But Robert was past listening. He was a dam that had finally burst. I tried to warn you, he shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. For months I showed you the numbers. I told you we were over-leveraged. I told you to pull back, to be prudent. But you wouldn't listen. You had to have your new cars and your fancy parties, and your million-dollar donations you couldn't afford. You drove this company, the company your grandfather built, straight into the ground. It was that investor. Mark shouted back. That vulture fund that bought our debt. They're the ones who screwed us. A harsh, joyless laugh escaped Robert's lips. Vulture fund? Is that what you still think? My God, you are even dumber than I thought. You are so insulated by your privilege, so blinded by your own reflection. You can't see the truth. He leaned over the table, his hands planted flat, his face inches from his nephew's. His voice dropped to a seething, intense whisper that was more terrifying than his shouting. It's not a fund, Mark. It's not a nameless corporation. It's a person. One person. What are you talking about? Mark's mother asked, her voice trembling. Robert straightened up, and his gaze swept across their terrified, uncomprehending faces. He took a deep breath like a man about to pull the pin on a grenade. It's the woman you scorned, he said, his voice ringing with grim satisfaction. The woman you all laughed at. The woman you dismissed as a nobody, a piece of furniture, an ugly rat. He let the words hang in the air before delivering the final devastating blow. Carol Thompson. Your mother-in-law. She is CT Holdings. She owns this company. She owns your house. She owns you. She isn't the family you have to live with, you pathetic fool. She's your new boss. The silence that followed, Robert said, was absolute. It was the silence of a world ending. The Vanderbilts in that moment ceased to exist. They were just three terrified people staring at the ruins of their lives, finally understanding the identity of the person who had set the fire. The next morning at precisely 9 a.m., a sterile corporate email landed in the inboxes of Mark Vanderbilt, his father, and Robert. It was a summons from the office of the chairman of the board of CT Holdings to an emergency session at our corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago. The subject line was simple: mandatory review of Vanderbilt Industries' leadership and assets. When they were escorted into the 40th floor boardroom, I was already there. I was seated at the head of a massive granite table that overlooked the entire city. The woman they saw was not the quiet, dowdy mother-in-law from Ohio. I was wearing a steel gray Chanel suit, my hair was immaculate, and my posture was one of absolute authority. I was flanked by two of my top lawyers. I was not there as Carol Thompson, the aggrieved mother. I was there as the chairman, and this was not a family discussion. This was a corporate execution. Gentlemen, I said, my voice cool and even echoing slightly in the minimalist room. Thank you for coming. Please sit. They sat like scolded schoolboys, their faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. Mark couldn't even look at me. He stared at the polished surface of the table as if it held the secrets to his escape. His father tried to muster some of his old bluster, but it came out as a weak, wheezing sound. Robert simply looked at me with a weary resignation, awaiting the final verdict. I wasted no time. My assistant placed a thick, professionally bound portfolio in front of each of them. The cover read, CT Holdings Acquisition and Asset File, Vanderbilt Industries. As you are now aware, I began, my tone leaving no room for argument. CT Holdings is the majority shareholder of Vanderbilt Industries. The first portfolio in front of you contains all relevant documentation. The debt acquisition agreements, the signed equity swap contracts, and the board resolutions confirming my position as chairman. I suggest you review it at your leisure. I paused as a second file was placed before them. This second portfolio contains the deed and title for the property located at 417 Lakeshore Drive, Winnetka. As you will find, the property is wholly owned by a real estate subsidiary of CT Holdings, following our acquisition of the defaulted mortgage note. It is, legally speaking, my house. Mark's father opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off with a single sharp glance. I am not finished. My assistant placed a final single sheet of paper on top of Mark's files. It was a copy of the notarized IOU for $50,000. And this, I said, my eyes locking onto Mark's for the first time, is a personal debt currently in default, for which you are legally liable. We will be collecting. I leaned back in my chair, letting the full crushing weight of their reality settle upon them. They were utterly and completely ruined, and I held the paperwork to prove it. Now to the purpose of this meeting, I said, my voice turning even colder. Effective immediately, Mark Vanderbilt's employment as Chief Executive Officer is terminated. The cause is gross financial mismanagement and dereliction of fiduciary duty. His severance will be nothing, I added for good measure. His final salary payment will be garnished to begin repayment of his personal debt. Mark physically flinched as if I had struck him. As for you, I said, turning to his father, the board has voted to accept your immediate resignation. A modest severance package has been prepared, contingent upon the signing of an extensive non-disclosure agreement. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. A formal eviction notice for the Winnetka property will be delivered to you this afternoon. You will have 30 days to vacate the premises. My lawyers will be in touch regarding a settlement for your remaining minority shares. This meeting is adjourned, I declared. I turned and walked toward the door without looking back. I had done it. I had stripped them of their power, their legacy, and their pride, not with emotion or anger, but with cold, hard, inescapable facts. The rat had taken the castle. But as the heavy boardroom door clicked shut behind me, the victory felt strangely hollow. There was still one loose thread, one piece of unfinished business that had nothing to do with contracts or companies. My daughter. The 30 days passed in silence. I received updates from Robert. The Vanderbilts had vacated the Winnetka house without a fight, taking their furniture and their shame with them. They had moved into a rented townhouse, a significant step down from their former glory. The mighty had fallen, and the city's gossip columns had already moved on to the next scandal. The Vanderbilt name was officially history, but from Jessica I heard nothing. The silence was a heavy blanket. Each day that passed, a little piece of the hope I didn't even know I was holding on to shriveled and died. I had won the war, but it seemed I had lost my daughter in the process. I told myself it was for the best. She had made her choice and I had made mine. Then one crisp autumn afternoon, nearly 2 months after the boardroom execution, there was a tentative knock on my front door in Ohio. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it and there she was. The change was staggering. She was no longer the polished, perfect Vanderbilt wife. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple pair of jeans and a worn corduroy jacket. Her hair was clean but unstyled, and her face was free of makeup, revealing pale skin and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She looked tired and thin, but for the first time in years she looked real. She was holding a single beat-up cardboard box. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice was small, fragile. "Jessica," was all I could manage. We stood there for a long, awkward moment, the screen door a flimsy barrier between us. I just wanted to bring you this," she said, holding the box out to me. "I thought you should have it." I took the box and looked inside. My heart constricted. It was the Irish chain quilt. It was folded neatly on top of a pile of old photo albums from her childhood. "It was the only thing I took from the house," she explained, her gaze fixed on the ground. "When I left." My head snapped up. "You left." She finally met my eyes and I saw the deep soul-crushing sadness there. "I left him, Mom. I filed for divorce. The day after the board meeting. When he came home, he wasn't sad. He was just ugly. He called me a gold-digging traitor. He said my only value was my connection to you, and since I had failed to control you, I was worthless. He said I had to choose. Go to you, beg you to give it all back, or get out. So I got out." The story tumbled out of her. She had been staying on a friend's sofa. She'd found a part-time job at a coffee shop, saving up for a deposit on a tiny apartment. She wasn't asking for my help. She wasn't asking for money. She was just reporting in. She was showing me she had made a choice. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she whispered, her voice thick with tears she was trying desperately not to shed. "I know I don't deserve it. What I did. What I let happen to you. It was unforgivable. I was a coward. I was so ashamed of where I came from, and so desperate to be one of them. I threw away the only person in the world who ever loved me unconditionally. I don't blame you for any of it. You just showed me the truth. And I'm so sorry." She looked so utterly broken, so stripped of all the artifice and pride she had hidden behind for years. And the cold wall of anger I had built around my heart began to crack. Underneath it all, she was still my child. My lost, foolish, broken child. The instinct to pull her into my arms was overwhelming. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Forgiveness couldn't be that easy. A wound this deep needed more than just words to heal. It needed time. It needed proof. It needed a new beginning, built on a foundation of truth, not a shared history of pain. Was it possible? Could we find our way back from the edge of this abyss? I honestly didn't know. I looked at my daughter, standing on my porch like a refugee from a life she had once coveted. And I knew this was the most important moment of our relationship. A simple hug, a platitude of "it's okay," would have been a lie. It would have erased the lesson she had so painfully learned. "A real apology is a good place to start, Jessica," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "But forgiveness isn't a gift I can just hand you. And trust has to be earned back. It's built on actions, not on words." I didn't invite her in to stay. To do so would be to rescue her, and she needed to learn to rescue herself. Instead, I said, "Come inside and have a cup of tea, and then we can talk about your next steps." That afternoon was the beginning of a long, slow, and often difficult process of rebuilding. I helped her find a small, clean apartment in a modest neighborhood. I didn't pay her rent, but I did co-sign the lease, a quiet statement of belief in her. I didn't give her money, but I did sit with her for hours helping her craft a resume, practicing for job interviews. She eventually found a full-time position as a receptionist at a dental clinic. The work was unglamorous, the pay was humble, but it was hers. For the first time in her adult life, she was standing on her own 2 feet. Our relationship became a series of small, tentative steps forward. We had dinner once a week. We talked about her work, my garden, the weather. We carefully navigated the minefield of our past, avoiding the topics that were still too raw. There were awkward silences and moments of painful misunderstanding. But slowly, carefully, we began to build a new bridge over the chasm that had separated us. The Vanderbilt name faded from the society pages. They became a local legend, a cautionary tale about pride and its inevitable fall. Mark, I heard, moved out of state, unable to face the constant reminders of his failure. Robert, true to his word, became an excellent, prudent CEO for the company his grandfather had founded. He had learned his lesson. About a year after she knocked on my door, Jessica came over for our weekly dinner. She seemed different, calmer, more centered. After we finished eating, she handed me a crisp, white envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 plus interest. "It's all there," she said, a small, proud smile on her face. "It took me a year of working 2 jobs, but it's all there." I took the envelope, but I didn't look at the check. I looked at her. I saw the strength in her eyes, the quiet dignity in her posture. She wasn't a Vanderbilt wife or a disgraced heiress. She was just Jessica, my daughter. And she had found her way back. "I'm proud of you," I said, and this time when I hugged her it felt real. The world may see power in loud voices, big houses, and fancy titles. But I learned that real power is silent. It's the patience to endure, the wisdom to plan, and the courage to demand the respect you deserve. They tried to reduce me to a cruel nickname to make me small and insignificant. But they forgot that the most resilient things in this world are not the strongest, but the ones most willing to adapt and survive. They called me a rat, but they never realized that I was the one who owned the maze. Thank you for listening to my story. It's a painful part of my past, but sharing it feels like a final step in reclaiming my own narrative. Now I want to hear from you. What's the best lesson you've learned about the difference between pride and dignity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times.